All right, so hello everyone. Thank you very much for joining me this early in the morning. I know it's a bit of an effort. I have a pretty long presentation, so some parts I'll walk through them very quick. So we can actually have a questions section afterwards. So if you want details on some of the stuff I'm telling here, just ask me afterwards. All right, so without further ado, the presentation is about how we balanced PvP in Ghost Recon Breakpoint. But to be fair, I think this title is more fitting because balancing is very, let's say, related, very tied to the specificities of that particular multiplayer game. So we have to walk through some of the design choices and some of the systems that we have in place for Breakpoint PvP as well. And of course, we'll have some balancing discussions along the way. All right, so let's start. All right, so first of all, a quick introduction on my side. My name is Alexandru Rais. I'm lead game designer for Ubisoft Bucharest. I've been with Ubisoft since 2015, and I've only worked on Ghost Recon projects. I've been focused on Ghost Recon, so I've been part of the Wildlands team and the Breakpoint team as well. And for most of my time, I've worked on the PvP side. This is called Ghost War, both in Wildlands and in Breakpoint. This was sort of the name, the branding we gave the PvP mode for Ghost Recon Breakpoint. And let's walk through some, let's say, introductory information about Breakpoint PvP first. All right, so this slide sort of describes the beginning of the process for building the PvP. When we first started working, we moved over from Wildlands and started working on Breakpoint. So first of all, of course, the main objective for us was we already had built PvP mode. We were lead side on that on Ubisoft Bucharest. For Wildlands, it surpassed our expectations in terms of success, so we knew we had a formula there that worked for us. So the main goal for us was to, let's say, select the parts that were really interesting and really fun and sort of build on that and work off of that as a platform for the PvP of Breakpoint. Then of course, since it's Breakpoint's a new game we want, and it's much more, the PvP was much better, let's say, included within the Ghost Recon experience. We wanted, of course, to make sure that we borrow a lot from the Breakpoint DNA and put it into PvP as well. We're, of course, going to be talking about how we try to make PvP fair, because Breakpoint, as some of you might know, has a lot of progression systems. So of course there was a lot of balancing discussions around that. We're going to be talking very quickly about some other systems that we've put in place to ensure medium to long-term player engagement. Also, we'll be walking through some of the systems that we've improved upon or changed for Breakpoint. And last but not the least, we'll be talking about the process for building maps. So a lot of stuff to cover, going through them really quick. All right, so first of all, building upon the PvP for Wildlands, right? So I'm not sure how many of you guys are familiar with Ghost War. I wanted to start with that, but since we have a lot of Ubi people in the room, it's sort of like cheating, so I'm not doing that anymore. So just as a quick introduction on Ghost War, in terms of like macro, big type of words, the philosophy behind Ghost War is, of course, it needs to be a military game because that's what Ghost Recon is all about, right? And it has to focus on the tactical side and on cooperating with your teammates. A better, let's say, more focused and more simpler explanation of the systems is this. It's 8 players 4v4. It's round-based, so the default format for matchmaking is best out of 3 rounds. It has several game modes. It has classes, so we used, let's say, the class system to emphasize certain playstyles. It has wide open maps, and it has a couple of what we're calling play formats. So it has matchmaking formats and also private game sessions. But so the right side is pretty clear. I don't need to explain anything over on that side. Let's discuss about the big vague words on the left side a bit more. So we have a couple of systems that feed into this, let's say, tactical approach and cooperative focused approach for the game. So first of all, we have a couple of systems that they're not entirely unique, like it's not the only PvP that does it, but most PvPs don't do this. So we don't have respawns during a round. Instead, you go into this down state, so where you can be revived by your teammates at any point during the round. So it's sort of an infinite revive. What's interesting about this concept is that because of this, down teammates actually act like soft objectives, if you will, during a round. So it's a very powerful buff for your team, of course, if you manage to get to one of your teammates and revive him. Because of the short time to kill and other considerants that we'll talk later on. So basically, I chose this picture deliberately. I mean, of course I chose it deliberately. I didn't slip on a banana and it appeared in my presentation. But what's very clear here is that you see the two teammates that are revivable. Like we're spectating this guy. This is actually from a match that I had last week. And you also see the surveillance system, which is a soft objective for the elimination game mode, which is a team deathmatch. So it basically showcases some of the decision making that can happen during a round. So right, I can go and revive those guys, I can go get the surveillance system, or I can choose to fight or whatever. What's interesting even more about the dead bodies and how they work within the Ghost War ecosystem of mechanics is that they really become soft objectives in the sense that there's a lot of organic gameplay that gets created around a dead body because, of course, teammates try to revive it. It's very strong in PvP since it's 4 versus 4, so one player counts a lot. And enemies try to camp the bodies and they can try to booby trap them, so there's a lot of stuff going around. Of course, people die in different locations, in different rounds, so yeah, there's a lot of variety throughout the rounds. All right, the other system is short time to kill. This is one of the things that we've done to make sure that the game feels a bit more realistic and more tactical focused, because by default, if you have a short time to kill, if you kill people fast, that means that run and gun is automatically nerfed. If you run like a crazy man out into the open, you're likely going to get sniped and you don't even know who sniped you. So you'll avoid doing that, to some extent at least. The main balance point for us, starting from Wildlands, is we found this, let's say, relation between class health and sniper rifles, which really defined the game. Because this was the most delicate relation that we had in the game, and we balanced everything around this. This is because sniping in Ghost Recon, and we had this feedback in numerous playtests, is it either felt too weak or too powerful because of this very delicate line. So where we ended up in the end is like sniper rifles, the SNR thing there, need to hit you, need to kill you in 1 or 2 body shots. I'm not talking about headshots here, of course. And designated marksman rifles, which have a higher rate of fire and lower damage, can kill you in 3 or 4. I know these sound like very simple numbers, but this is like the core of damage to health ratio. And if you can see there in the health bars of the classes, the blue bars, we actually have the same system in Wildlands as well. We have a class that's tankier, has more health, so that class can actually withstand 2 hits from a sniper while the others are 1 shot. So this is very critical to the way that shooting works. Then we have what we call the intel loop. So it's based on how you find the enemies, how you mark them and detect them. So there's a lot of particularities specific to Ghost War around this intel loop, because it really feels like a cat and mouse game. Because this is, and I took this picture specifically for this, so this is a screenshot of what you see at the beginning of a round in Ghost War. So you see the map is quite wide open, there's a lot of vegetation cover. You really don't know where your enemies are more than, like, say a specific location, like that general direction in like the forest there. So the first thing you actually need to do in a Ghost War match is position yourself correctly and look for the enemies. And this is you can get a quite critical advantage over your enemies if you know how to position well and you find the enemies before they find you, right? Because of the short time to kill. We also have other supporting systems in place. So for example, you see that yellow sort of a circle thingy on the minimap. That's what we call the sound marker. So that sort of signifies the origin, the approximate origin from which an enemy gunshot has originated from. And we also have, it might be not that clear in this picture, but you might be able to see it contrast with the trees, but we have quite enhanced bullet trails for the weapons, especially for sniper rifles. So this is a very efficient way to signal the location of enemies, and it's very cool because it's diegetic, it's very embedded into the world, right? So it doesn't feel artificial like some sort of UI helpers. And you can also see in the far right that that's a marker of an enemy that got tagged by one of your teammates. I know something's working. Oh, right, perfect. No, back please. All right. So we also have drones in the game. They are very powerful intel tools, of course, but they also get automar for the enemies just because of that. There's an interesting tactical decision to make here because, of course, players can shoot down the drones, but if they do, they create sound markers. That might be one of the better tactical choices in some situations, because if you get marked, that's a more powerful information for the enemies because you stay marked for a period of time. But there's also suppressors in game. So actually, if you mount suppressors on SMGs or handguns, you actually nullify the sound marker. It doesn't create the sound marker on the minimap. So there's a lot of interesting choices to think about. And also we have the surveillance system, which is specific to the elimination game mode, and it marks the position of the enemy team for a while. The last ingredient is for collaboration and tactical focus as well, is the ping and spectate features. Basically, we have a pinging game. Pinging is the most efficient way to cooperate with the enemies. It's more widespread than voice chat for sure, and it's contextual enough that players understand what you're pinging. And second, we have spectate, so when you're down, you can actually cycle between the remaining players in your team. You can move the camera and ping for them. All right, let's go to breakpoint systems. So first of all, the first system that we put into PvP was the new injury system from Breakpoint. So this basically means that, let me describe the injury system first. I think that's a better approach. So the injury system, how it worked in PvE is that as you stumble and fall, or as you take damage, you get more and more injured. So there are injury levels to the game, so you start to like move, you're a bit crippled, and then it can get to a point where you can actually only hold a pistol up. We implemented that in Breakpoint, but because of comfort issues and because of balancing reasons, so because the power level sort of fluctuates very aggressively. If I only have a handgun and you have an assault rifle, we actually made them so they only trigger after you get revived, and we only trigger the most basic level of injury, so you just limp a bit. So it affects your movement, but not to a degree where it's too frustrating. Also, we implemented, of course, the movement system from Breakpoint is also available in PvP, so it sort of reacts, the character reacts realistically to the environment. But one thing that we've done is we've had a separate stamina pool for PvP. We've actually increased stamina for PvP, and we made it equal across the board. So you don't, so all players sort of start PvP with maxed out stamina just because of comfort reasons. Then I guess one of the biggest systems in Breakpoint is the shared progression system. So basically it means that your character and loadout is the same between PvE and PvP. So that brings along with it a lot of RPG stuff that needs to be balanced. We're going to be talking about this. But first, a breakdown of the progression system itself. So the character is shared with everything that the character has on it. I guess I need to stay closer. All right. You also have the skill tree that's shared. You get skill points through PvP as well. So you could play only PvP and unlock the entirety of the skill tree if you wish. Also, classes have a progression system of their own. It's called class ranks. So you have these sort of challenges that you need to complete to go to the next rank, and we also have PvP versions of them. And of course, the loot is shared as well, because that's a very important part. So in PvE, it sort of works as you would imagine. Killed enemies drop loot, or you can find it in bases. In PvP, we give out loot at the end of matches, so you have to stick to the end of a match if you want to get loot. That's a thing. And secondly, we made sure we balance out the reward schedule for PvP. So we actually took measurements of what it takes to complete like the hardest content in PvE, because we equivalent PvP with hardcore PvE content in chunks of 1, 3, and 6 hours. And we sort of approximated how much you get in these amount of times in PvP, including travel time between locations. And we sort of approximated that and gave it out in PvP as well. Same amount of loot, same quality, and same types. So basically, in the end, what we're trying to say with PvP, which was very important for us, is that we wanted to alter the perception that if you want to play PvP, you're taking a break from the main game, you're taking a break from progression. Actually, all the critical systems that are not PvE specific can be completed in PvP as well, so you can progress through them just by playing PvP. All right, let's talk a bit about balancing, and especially on the progression side, because there's a lot of stuff here. So of course, one of our objectives was to not have the veteran players, the highly engaged players, win consistently against new players. We wanted to balance this out. And there are a couple of ways to do this. Like, of course, it's not a new science. Some games prefer to max out your character, let's say, or to normalize everything, and it's flat, and RPG doesn't work in PvP. But for us, it meant that we're losing like half of the game's content. So that was a big loss on player engagement for us. So we tried to find a way where we shrink down the power balance to a margin where you barely notice it. Like by the time you notice it, you're advanced enough. So it's sort of the philosophy behind the Destiny PvP, more like. So the first thing that we've done, which was a no-brainer for us, was to disable gear level in PvP. This is basically the gear score in MMOs, if you will. This, of course, needed to be disabled because it varies time to kill too much, and it breaks one of our core philosophies that we've previously discussed. So this was gone the first minute. Then we applied specific caps to the PvP stats. You have stats in the game, it's an RPG, so you have like stealth, stamina, accuracy, and so on. So we made sure, again, that there's not too much imbalance, and we've done so by putting let's say, the lower threshold at a very comfortable levels and only increasing it slightly with caps. So basically, if you have, I don't know, like gear that gives you 120 stamina in total, only 20 points of those will work. So the rest, you are better off if you focus in other stats. And this, of course, led to the philosophy of no critical advantages in PvP if you progress. Nothing that really like breaks the game. I know it sounds a bit like lawyer talk when you see critical there, like, why didn't you say no advantages, Alex? So that means there are some. And of course they are. Like, it's pretty logical. Like you have a first set of advantages that come through the fact that you progress your skill tree, right? And you unlock more classes, you unlock more stuff, more weapons. So of course, if you have more choices, you might be able to balance out the situation more. But it's more of a focus on horizontal progression rather than vertical. So you get more choices, but it doesn't mean, and we really tried hard to do this, it doesn't really mean that the choices you get later on are better than the ones you have at first. Everything that you have with you at first is viable in endgame as well. This is why we also did a couple of other things. So for example, night vision is available in the skill tree to be unlocked. For PvP, it's forced unlocked. So because we have time of day, we have weather settings, so it would have been too much of a game changer, like if people with night vision played against people that don't have it. So we made it available. And of course, we made sure we increased stamina as well, because it's a shooter game, so we're focusing on shooting and mobility and movement. These are the two things that we don't touch that need to be as comfortable as possible. And we cannot balance in disfavor of that. All right. In terms of long-term player engagement, I'll be super quick on this. Basically, we made sure that as much as possible from the skill tree is usable in PvP as well. We try to make adjustments to support some systems like stealth and so on. And secondly, we added this, what in the game it's called PvP missions. So it's basically an achievement type of system. We had 43 achievements at launch. They're basically one-off achievements that you can do and get a lot of rewards. This is basically where a lot of the PvP progression system went into. So you can get skill points out of this. You can get rewards like visual customization stuff, titles, and so on. What's very important about this system is, and I'm not going to detail right now, we have a bunch of achievement types. We have one that are more like onboarding achievements, which we're calling certification missions. So those are like the most, let's say, simple to use. They focus on like you using the mechanics of PvP, like go revive people, go use the objective, and so on. And we've only put skill point rewards in those types of certification missions because we don't want high skill ceiling to be a gate towards unlocking the entirety of the skill tree for PvP. Right, we of course looked at the systems and thought, what can we do to add more tactical depth and make the systems more replayable? So first of all, we're going to be talking about game modes. It's sort of a cliche, like it's well understood by itself, but I have an interesting story related to this. Of course, game modes sort of filter out your audience, and it determines what type of audience you have for your game. What we did not realize back in Wildlands, and we sort of discussed this during the process of developing Breakpoint, is the fact that for Wildlands, even if you fire up Wildlands right now, you have a bunch of game modes. We only launched with one game mode, which was elimination. It was a non-objective mode, so that sort of in itself filtered the audience, the players who played our game, right? So they're the guys who would have preferred objective type stuff like domination, capture a control point or whatnot. They were sort of put off by that, and even if we delivered on those objectives later on those game modes, like a chunk of the existing audience reacted negatively to it because they were the elimination people. So this is actually a screenshot from an internal. We have a lot of tracking tools internally for a lot of systems. We have a dedicated data analysis team that we work with and sort of ping pong back and forth tracking feedback. This is actually the map voting results for a while. And so you see there, survival mode was the internal name for elimination, and you see like the heavy preference for survival. You see there's like an uplink game mode there, but it's more because of the map more than the mode. It has some specificities, but yeah, this is how the audience was filtered. So moving back to Breakpoint, we took this into account, so we really made it a priority to make sure we have two game modes at launch. One was elimination because people like that, of course. The other was sabotage, which is an objective-based game mode. It's a bomb mode, which is we like this because it's the most, let's say, preferred. It's the go-to mode for competitive PvP games. So from Counter-Strike to Siege to whatever you want, in a lot of PvP games, people tend to, let's say, gather around bomb modes. Other systems, I'm walking really quickly through this. We wanted to make sure, just because it's PvP by itself in Ghost Recon happens on wide open maps, there are not a lot of players, the teams are compact, so we really wanted to encourage people to get to move around the map and be active. So basically we removed anything that meant that if I wait, I get stuff, like the drones would automatically refill over time, and the ultimate, you see the blue bar on the right side, would also fill over time. So we removed those. Drones are items that you pick up from the map, so you have to be active on the map, find them and pick them up. And also for the ultimate to charge, you have to mark people, you have to deal damage, you have to revive, and so on, use objectives. The second part is that we removed a lot of the player inventory, like we looked around your pockets and whatever you have, we scattered them across the map, what you'd regularly have on you, because that's the core philosophy, right? We want you to be active and to get stuff. Secondly, we've added this feature, which was more or less quite controversial for us. The Battle Royale Circle, for us it was called the Shrinking Combat Zone. We added this for the elimination game mode because there was no, let's say, central objective that would organically pull players towards each other. So basically at the end of rounds, if players haven't finished the round by then, there will be this big circle in place that would shrink down and basically end the round on a high note because it forces players, it pushes them to fight against each other. What's interesting about this is that it's actually, we didn't want to make elimination like fight the circle mode. We looked at data analysis again. The average round time for PvP matches in Wildlands, and it's still the same in Breakpoint, is around 3:30 to 4 minutes. So this actually kicks in at 5 minutes 30. So it's well beyond the average duration of a round. So you won't encounter it in regular PvP matches. You will only encounter it in the situation where both teams have been increasingly passive throughout the round. All right, and the last thing that we've did in terms of improvements is we've added more freedom for the players. So we've removed class restrictions. You can have as many classes, many of the same classes you want per team, and we've removed weapon restrictions per class, so you can have any class and any weapons. And this is going back to the core philosophy that I've talked to you guys about earlier, is since shooting and movement are core, and in this case shooting, we're not touching that. We want to make it as comfortable as possible, and we'll balance the game in other ways. So because this causes discomfort, especially in the Ghost Recon community, which is highly specific, and again, we need to take into account, we try to take this into account for Breakpoint, like we're building a PvP mode for the PvE players of Ghost Recon. So they were used to having 60 weapons in their loadout, that they can put whatever they want in PvE, and then they came to PvP where they only had 3 weapons per class. So they reacted negatively to that, a portion of them. Even though it's a very common system, like you see it in Siege, you see it in a lot of other games, but this didn't really matter for part of the Breakpoint or the Ghost Recon community. All right, we also did some updates on the systems. I'll go very quickly on this topic. So marking, because of short time to kill, because it's hard to detect enemies. If you're marked, you feel exceptionally vulnerable. Even if all data pointed towards marking being tracked, it was still a perception issue, and perception issues need to be addressed. Otherwise, it really doesn't matter if the game looks balanced or not. Secondly, the drones as items, because this was a perception issue as well. Like it was part of the marking system issues. Like some people didn't like the amount of drones, so just having them as items, and you have like 4 drones on the map, automatically reduces this. And dedicated servers, which is a no-brainer, of course. We need that in PvP. And last topic, I'm going quickly through this as well. Map building. What's different, what changed in Breakpoint is the fact that we had a specific level design and level art team that built maps from the scratch to support PvP. In Wildlands, we had to, let's say, section off areas of the big world. And basically, we tested hundreds of these locations, and then we selected PvP maps. In Breakpoint, the PvP maps are still part of the larger game world of the Aurora Island. But what we did is, at the beginning of the development process, we negotiated with the campaign team and like drew rectangles on the map. I like this snowy mountain, I like this swamp. We're taking those, we're commandeering them, and we built whatever we needed on those locations, but still try to integrate them with the rest of the map, of course, because you'll find them in PvE. I think I moved too much, guys. All right, so in terms of maps themselves, we basically did quick maths. We knew that we can build 6 maps to the quality level that we wanted. And the process for that is we take the 3 best maps we had in Wildlands, we look at what made them really good and try to recreate that in Breakpoint, but and improve them, of course. And then we do 3 new maps that are crazier. We're going to be talking about one of the improved maps now. But first, some quick notes about the balancing behind maps. If I were to choose 3 elements that are key to making a good ghost war map, it would be this. So the map needs to have a 3-lane layout. The vegetation density needs to be controlled because it's very easy to hide in the lush vegetation of Ghost Recon. And then to manage high ground, because high ground dictates how the map will be played. So 3-lane layout, again, it's pretty self-explanatory. I didn't get a better picture. I'm not sure if it's that readable in this one. But I hope you can see that there are like literally 3 lanes, one on the bottom, one on a flanking route on the top. You cannot see the topology that well in this picture, but there are a lot of hills, so you're protected, and the middle part. In terms of vegetation density, this is what we were working with in Wildlands. So imagine finding an enemy here. So of course we tried to avoid a lot of the maps that were very lush like this. Again, like it's an issue because the enemy can be anywhere. Any of these bushes can be a killer bush. So yeah, this is a better example from Wildlands, and this is actually one of the Wildland maps that we had for PvP. Vegetation density is better, even if those bushes are big enough to hide the player when he's crouching and when he's in prone, of course. But because you have dead space around them, you can at least track movement. So this is definitely a big improvement already. These are some extreme cases from Breakpoint. So as you can see, we used a lot of knee-high grass. We tried to avoid using lots of bushes. And we referred internally to the knee-high grass as like negative space, because this is what it is. Because in the end, we really wanted to filter out, to help the player out in distinguishing like where could the locations be where an enemy is. And you really want to have like 2, 3, or let's say 5 locations in front of you where you know an enemy can be. If there are like 20 different locations, it means that when you get killed, it's random. Like you cannot account for 20 different locations. And also, yeah, when we had like bushes that hide people on some maps, we did we sort of used the tricks like whatever the vegetation and those biomes allowed us, so to highlight that bushes might be a killer bush. All right, high ground. In terms of high ground, we had to deal with variance in terms of the access to high ground from the 2 teams that have spawned. This is a picture from Wildlands. The arrows mark the 2 locations where the team spawn. And I draw this beautiful line because this sort of highlights the high ground difference much more. So even though the red team had some flanking options, like the high ground was too much. And in the end, the map was imbalanced and we had to remove it from the matchmaking pool. This is how it feels like when you're spawning on the red side, like the mountain is really overbearing, overpowering you, and you feel like you need to stay behind cover. This is another example of a map that we've tried to balance for centuries. And because of the layout, it was very hard. See, it doesn't have like a big, huge mountain on a side, but it has this slope which allows you to oversee all the map. So whatever we did, we played with spawn points, we played with alternating the map. People would go on the hill, and this map was basically the hill battle. All right, so we're going to be discussing about one of the maps that we've moved into Breakpoint. This is Deforestation from Wildlands. This was a very balanced map for us, and players had fun playing it. It also had very good numbers in map voting. So this is where the teams spawn, the red and blue. You can sort of distinguish, maybe the picture is not the best, but I hope you can distinguish the main 3 routes. Of course, since the map is very open, it's organic, like you could go between them. There's nothing stopping you. It's not like there's lava or canyons. But for the most of it, this is how players approach it. They either flank it on the side or they go to the middle house. In terms of high ground and sniping locations, you have these sniping ridges on either side, sorry. So there was a bit of an advantage for the red team because they had a higher mountain to rely on, although the topology isn't that visible here. The blue team isn't that low on the map. But what sort of balanced it out is the fact that the sniping hill itself is barren, so there's not a lot of vegetation to hide behind, so you can at least read out when there is sniper movement around that. So it sort of was an interesting asymmetrical play. This is how the map ended up in Breakpoint. So we basically enlarged the middle part. We made it more homogeneous, like a big interior to fight over. And you still have, you'll see the same spawns. I'm trying to click. Okay, we did it. And we have the 3 flanking opportunities, and there's loot along the way, along the main flanking paths. In terms of sniping, it's the same deal. So we have 2 sniping bridges, and you have also some counter sniping locations. I'm not sure, am I doing this wrong? I think it's lagging, sorry. All right, and you have some counter sniping opportunities as well. We added some more sniping bridges to the side, so you can actually be like a sniper sort of flanker class. This is how the center part looked in deforestation, and if we get this to move, we'll see how this looks in Breakpoint. So we really enlarged the middle part. All right, and we're going to be talking about balance really quick, and I'm done. These are the current percentages. I mean, last week's percentages on sabotage, for example. So this is the attacking team win rate. Overall, it's fairly balanced. We are deploying a fix next week for the Cold War bunker. It's just a small tweak to it, but overall, it's well within the balanced margins. This is also a tool that we use, and it's very useful for us. It's map density layouts. It basically shows us if a map is properly used, like if people use it to its full extent, or they stay on one side, and we make changes based on that. So it's sort of a very easy visual way to confirm our intentions. And in terms of classes, this is again a screenshot. It's barely readable, but I did some CSI stuff to it. So this is the most important part of the class balance. We have a lot of information regarding classes, but I would say these are the most important. So the first line is pick rate, the second line is win rate, and the third line is kill to death ratio. So it's very important to also understand context and what these numbers actually tell you, because they tell you different stuff in different games. So for us, pick rate, if you see there's a significant preference for assault, but this is not an issue for us, because again, this is a PvE game that we've built a PvP upon, and the most comfortable class to play PvE solo is the assault. Like, it's holistically the best. So we're expecting more preference towards that. This only shows preference and perception. The second thing, the win rate, as you can see, overall it's good balance. We're happy with this current state of balance. We're going on the sort of the Rainbow Six Siege balancing team philosophy, which is really good, and it works for us as well because the games are similar to some extent, which is that we're looking for variances that are more than 5% in difference. So there is a slight adjustment that we're also shipping next week to the sharpshooter. It's a very slight balance. We're making it more powerful at detection. But because win rate is, of course, a zero-sum game, if we increase the sharpshooter, the other classes will go down, and the balance right now is pretty fair on most sides, so that's why we're not going overboard on buffing the sharpshooter. A slight balance will do, a buff. And the last line, the kill to death ratio, actually shows playstyle more than it shows anything. Like, it's so close that it basically says that, yeah, weapons and the fact that everyone has access to the same weapons is the most important part of making it balanced. It's more important than the class abilities and so on. And the RPG system is non-existent. This actually shows that it confirms that part of the players that play sharpshooter actually prefer to stay behind the lines and don't move enough. And this is confirmed when we cross-check the sharpshooter kill to death ratio data with the map density data. So we see if sharpshooters, the guys who play sharpshooters and move around the map actually have very good kill to death ratio. So it's only a perception issue. They stay behind, they don't get enough opportunities to kill everyone because people are moving, and then they're the only ones left and they get killed. So it's a skill issue more than something wrong. And this is one of the tables that has been the most useful for us. This is the way that we sort of discuss class balance the most. The y-axis, the vertical line shows win rate, and the horizontal axis, the x, shows pick rate and preference. So you can see there's a slight, like the sharpshooter feels the worst in this table, but also mind you that the percentages are very stretched. So yeah, we're balancing that. And that's basically it. Sorry if my presentation was too long. Thank you, everyone. And if you have questions, I don't know if we have time. That's it. Thanks.